All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of good information to get to today. So this is our webinar on managing big emotions, effective strategies and tools to understand, support, and guide students in or children in regulating their emotions and behavior. I'm Dr. Erika Stapert. I'll be introducing myself a little bit more, and then Viktoria Scott will also be introducing herself, and we are co-presenting together. So as I just mentioned, I'm Dr. Erika Stapert. I have been a licensed psychologist in New York City since 2011. I work with children, adolescents, adults, and families, and my specialty is really in the area of disruptive behavior disorders. So disruptive behavior disorders are, those children who present with a high level of oppositionality. You might see them have tantrums. You might see some aggression, just general difficulties with kind of managing their behavior and following directions. And a main treatment modality that I use when working with families with disruptive behavior disorders is parent-child interaction therapy. Some of the tools that we'll be going through today are actually drawn from PCIT, and I am both a provider as well as a within agency trainer of that treatment modality. A little bit about where I work. So I am from the Manhattan Psychology Group. We are a multidisciplinary team. So we have a very large team of over 200 adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, BCBAs, and special educators. We currently provide services both virtually as well as in person, and we currently have two offices. One is on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, and one is in Long Island City, Queens. We work with people of all ages, most conditions and challenges, and a wide variety of settings. We really pride ourselves on providing wraparound care. So we have psychological testing, ABA behavioral and educational services. And as you can see, there's a laundry list of the specific types of treatments that we provide. I'm not going to go through them all. If you wanted more information, you could definitely discover everything about us on our website. I'll turn it over to Vicki.
Hello, I'm Viktoria, and I am a licensed occupational therapist in Austria. And I'm also currently working on my field work to become a BCBA. I work with children, adolescents, and families, and specialize in challenging behavior and sensory regulation. And within Apex Social, I provide expert support for our care professionals who serve children and adolescents of all abilities. So at Social Group, we have been supporting families since 2008, and we provide live-in developmental childcare for children of all abilities. We ensure stability and professional support for our families, while we also enhance caregiver retention. And all of our care professionals are recruited from European and American universities, vocational schools, and they are and other globally recognized institutions, and they all have expertise in therapy, education, or healthcare. Our program is tailored to meet the unique needs of each child, so that we can foster their growth and development. And we are dedicated to build a community that champions inclusivity, empowerment, and creates a lasting impact for our families and our caregivers alike.
All right, so I'm going to first go over our seminar goals. We are going to be providing a lot of information, and feel free to put questions that you might have in the chat. We will be holding some time at the end to go through those questions. So we won't be answering questions throughout the presentation because we want to make sure to have time to disseminate all the information that we want to share, but we will be saving some time at the end to address those questions. So what are we setting out to achieve today? We really want to provide a comprehensive understanding of the connection between emotions and behaviors, and really how to recognize and address underlying emotional issues that may contribute to these challenging behaviors. Also, striving to create a safe and supportive learning environment where children really feel understood, respected, and empowered to manage their emotions constructively. So, let's first talk about why children exhibit challenging behaviors in the first place. We look at this through the lens of trying to determine what the function of that behavior is. So, children communicate with us in different ways. And, since children are quite young and haven't quite yet developed the verbal capacity to express their thoughts, their feelings, their needs verbally, oftentimes they are communicating to us through their behaviors. And sometimes those behaviors can be quite challenging in nature. So, one reason for challenging behavior might just be that you have a child who is kind of predisposed to have increased emotional dysregulation. A second reason would be that potentially the child is seeking negative attention by acting out. And then another function is either trying to obtain something that is preferred or actually avoiding something that is non preferred, right? So, kind of trying to get something that they want or trying to kind of get out of something, potentially doing something that they're averse to. In today's talk, we're going to be focusing on the first two functions, so emotional dysregulation and negative attention. So let's talk first about that emotional dysregulation piece. So, what we might see, right, behaviorally, which might be an indicator of underlying emotional difficulties, we might see behaviors like procrastination, avoidance. For a child who is really anxious, right, you might see some perfectionism and the child taking a very long time to complete a task. You might see, irritability and emotional outbursts or just outright resistance and refusal to doing certain things. Of course, aggression can also sometimes be displayed. You might see children running off, shutting down, being really reluctant to join in, or maybe making hateful comments towards themselves or others. So, as you see, there can be kind of these outward behavioral displays of potentially, underlying emotional difficulties. And then there could be some more of the internal piece, right? Like the taking a long time to complete tasks or perfectionism. So, kind of these big outbursts, right? Or more of like the internal things like shutting down or taking a significant amount of time on certain tasks. So, I first want to talk about the biosocial theory of emotions. This was a theory developed by Marcia Linehan, who is the creator of dialectical behavior therapy. And when we have a better understanding of children's emotions, this then helps us be more understanding and supportive of them. So, Marcia Linehan's biosocial theory has two components. We have the biological vulnerability piece, and then we have the social vulnerability piece. And both of those aspects kind of interact with one another and can result in a lot of emotional dysregulation. So let's talk first about this biological vulnerability piece. So, what we know is that everyone experiences emotions differently, right? You might have two people in the exact same situation, but emotionally, they might feel kind of differently in that exact same situation. They might display their emotions differently. So, each and every person experiences emotions in a unique way. And so children are wired differently in terms of, how intense they experience emotions and really how they react to them. And this is also, true for adults as well. So this biological vulnerability piece, it has three aspects to it. So the first aspect are these big emotions, right? And this is where the emotion that they're experiencing isn't incorrect. It's just that it's more intense. So you're thinking about kind of the volume on their emotion being turned up. Okay. So you might have a child who feels angry about something and, maybe rightly so. But that display of that anger is going to be like the volume is turned way up on that emotion. And so they're going to be exhibiting it in a more significant way than, maybe someone else. The next aspect are those big reactions. So what happens is, a child is triggered by something. And, because a lot of children are impulsive in nature, particularly those who experience big emotions, a trigger happens and this leads to a very big and or quick reaction. So there's really no time between the emotion and the response. And then the response ends up being very disproportionate to the situation at hand, right? So child starts to feel angry, and then their response is just like that, without actually thinking through how they could best express that feeling. They're just going to have that big or quick reaction to it. And then for children who have this biological vulnerability piece to them, the return to baseline can either take a very long time. So the emotion might get really intense, and the child kind of stays in that state for a very long time and has a very difficult time regulating. Or you might actually have a child who experiences big emotions who comes back down to baseline extremely quickly. And that can be really difficult and challenging for adults because the child might be back at baseline, but we're still feeling kind of revved up about the situation and upset about it. And then all of a sudden it feels like, well, wait, like he's kind of just moving on, acting as if nothing ever happened in the first place. Like, what's going on here? And it might actually appear very insensitive in nature, but that's not really what's taking place here. It's just that some of these kids can escalate really quickly and de escalate back to baseline and move on as if nothing ever happened in the first place. Now let's talk about the social environment aspect of this biosocial theory. So basically, the social environment can affect emotion, dysregulation when a child is sent the message, whether this is intentional or not, that their thoughts and feelings are incorrect or out of the ordinary. And I really want to point out here that most of the time, this is very unintentionally done, right? So it might be a peer, a teacher, a parent, a support provider, really unintentionally sends that message to the child that their feelings are wrong. And so the child then gets this message that their feeling is incorrect or really out of the ordinary, too intense, basically, that just their emotions and their emotional expression is wrong. So if the social environment, right, is kind of disregarding the child's feelings, this is really then going to discourage negative emotional expression. Okay. And this could be done by, someone saying something like, stop crying, or there's no reason to be upset. Calm down, right? And all of these statements are very well intended in nature, right? The intention behind these statements is to make the child feel better, right? Because we don't want children to feel really angry or really sad or really anxious. That makes us feel kind of anxious and upset ourselves. So the way we kind of work through that and resolve the situation is by saying things like, "Oh, stop crying," or there's no real need to be upset here. It's not a big deal. It's okay. Calm down, right? And even though that's so well intended, unfortunately, it discourages the negative emotional expression and can send the message to children, right, that their feelings are incorrect, that they shouldn't feel that way. The other thing that could happen is oversimplification of problem solving, right? So we've probably all said to a child, I will admit this, like I, will say this at times to my own children, you just take some deep breaths, right? Or just get out there and do it and you'll be fine. And once again, our intention is to kind of give them a coping strategy. But if you think about it, if you had a really difficult day at work and you walked in and your partner could see that you're really difficult and you're just like venting about it, and your partner was just like, just take some deep breaths. you're probably like, what? You don't understand what I'm feeling here. It's not as simple as just take a few deep breaths and move on. So even though those things are very well intended in nature, they can come across as very invalidating. And so what ends up happening is there's this mismatch between the person's emotional vulnerability and then the environment in which they're in. So as you can see, if we add this biological vulnerability piece to an invalidating social environment, I really want to underscore the fact that when I say invalidating social environment, this is happening unintentionally. None of us are intentionally invalidating children. But when there's this combination and interplay between the biological vulnerability and the invalidating social environment, what this leads to is really children not trusting themselves, right? They're not trusting what they feel, who they are. We might then see even increased emotional dysregulation. Right. So if the child doesn't trust their own feelings, that's actually going to lead to more problematic displays of these emotions. And then we also see increased impulsivity and interpersonal difficulties. And these interpersonal difficulties come into play when a child feels like, the people around me really don't understand me. So how can I go about trying to connect with others if they don't get me in the first place? So, how do we build emotional resilience? If we're really wanting to target that emotional dysregulation piece, there are some things that we're going to be talking about today in terms of specific tips, strategies, tools that you can put in your toolkit when working with or raising children. We first want to be really mindful of attending to children's positive behaviors, and we'll really get into what that looks like. Really want to help children label their emotions. And we want to help children learn how to self regulate, right? So we can kind of balance all of these things. So we're not just saying, just take some deep breaths, or it's not that big of a deal. Just get out there and do it. These are 3 things that we can be doing throughout the day to really help build that emotional resilience. So we're first going to talk today about how do we attend to a child's positive behaviors. And I'm going to talk about the pride skills. And these are all drawn from parent-child interaction therapy. That was a therapy approach developed by Sheila Iberg and Beverly Funderburk. Initially developed for children with disruptive behavior disorders, but what we see is that these pride skills also help children who are anxious, who are depressed. They lead to children feeling more confident in who they are, feeling more comfortable, less anxious, more secure. I kind of look at these skills as like magical skills where sometimes I don't know what the secret sauce is behind them, but they really, really work in just improving emotional regulation as well as behavior in children. So, PRIDE is an acronym, and, for today's purposes, I'm going to also add an extra E. So, no, PRIDE is not spelled, PRIDEE. But we're going to add that extra E because it is going to refer to a really helpful skill to be utilizing. So, P is for praise. We want to be using specific labeled praise for the positive things that children do. The reason that we want praise to be specific, and this is very important for children ages 2.5 to 7, either chronologically or developmentally, because children that age really need to know specifically what it is that you approve of or that you like, so that they then can do that again to get that positive attention. So what praise does is really reinforces positive behavior, which then increases the possibility or probability that such behavior continues. And really what we want to be thinking about, the most powerful praises, all praises are amazing, but the most powerful ones when it comes to changing behavior are those that pay attention to what we call positive opposites. So what you do is you kind of create your laundry list of, problematic behaviors that you're seeing in a child. Let's say, for example, it's aggression. And then you think of what is the positive opposite. So instead of becoming aggressive, what do I want this child to do? So in this situation, right, instead of becoming aggressive, I would want the child to use their words or to have safe hands. And so then what you do, not just in situations that are causing the child to feel angry and upset that typically trigger aggression, but in other situations as well, you praise anytime the child is using their words, anytime they're having safe hands to really help build up that skill and also remind them in a positive way what is expected, right? So a nice labeled praise would sound something like, I love how you told me how you're feeling, or you're doing a great job using safe hands right now. And this really reinforces those behaviors and then increases the likelihood that these behaviors will be exhibited again. R is for reflect. This is simply repeating back what children say. This is a skill, that we use in a therapeutic setting, where, if I was meeting with an adult client and they told me about, something that happened to them over the weekend, after they were done sharing about it, I would kind of summarize or repeat back what I heard. And what this shows my client is that I'm really listening and that what they have to say is really important. And this is extremely powerful and validating to children, right? If children know that we as adults are taking what they say seriously, they're going to be more likely to tell us about things, right? So if we're paying attention to the small things, such as, I had hot dog for lunch. Oh, you had a hot dog for lunch. They're going to be then more likely to also share with us the big things, right? Because if they know, wow, my, caregiver, my support provider really listens to me intently when I'm telling them about the little stuff, well, then they must really want to know the big stuff too. Right. And so that kind of opens up the lines of communication. I is for imitate. This is really just joining in with children. It shows that you're expressing approval of chosen activities. It gives opportunities to teach appropriate play skills. So imitation really means, spending some time with children where you are playing side by side, you're doing what they're doing, and you're keeping your play on their developmental level. And that's really important, because if you're trying to imitate, but you're kind of playing in a more advanced way, the child can start to feel kind of badly about their own abilities. And then that play or that interaction can become a lot more about you and what you're doing and less about them. Imitation is also great because it teaches appropriate play skills. So if you have a child who's building with magnet tiles, you join in, you're building as well. That's opening opportunities for cooperation, sharing, turn taking, all things that we would love to see children be capable of doing. D is for describe, and really this is just a play-by-play of your child's actions, describing the positive things that children do and also describing your own actions. So in play, this looks, simply like a commentary of what they're doing with their hands. If you're building with magnet tiles, it might be, oh, you're grabbing a green magnet tile and you're stacking that up with the rest of them. And it looks like you're making a big tower. And now you added a triangle piece to the top. And what this play-by-play does is not only does it attend to those positive behaviors, thereby reinforcing them, but it also helps a child maintain attention and organize their thoughts. This is really, really helpful with any children with distractibility and attention, difficulties focusing. And what we find is that when we are coaching parents and using descriptions, children are able to sustain attention on a task for much longer periods of time, and they really get engrossed in the play. E is for enjoy. This simply means showing children that you enjoy spending time with them. This can be done, through an animated facial expression, animated tone of voice. It could be pats on the back, high fives, like anything that you're kind of saying or doing that shows them that you enjoy spending this time with them. And that really helps to create a warm, happy connection between adults and children. And then that extra E there is for emotion labeling. And we'll be talking more about that today, but really talking about labeling children's feelings and not just the negative ones, not just in the heat of the moment saying, oh, you seem really angry right now. Yes, that's extremely valuable, but we also want to be teaching children language around their positive feelings. So if your child is very excited about something, you say that out loud. Wow, you seem really excited to play this game today. That just increases emotional awareness, right? It starts kind of building that emotion vocabulary. that children need to really be able to articulate verbally how they're feeling. And it's going to provide that validation. And we'll talk more about validation, but what we're trying to counteract, right, is that unintentional invalidation of children's feelings. And instead, we're going to really intentionally provide validation of feelings. And one way that you can do this is through emotion labeling. So when should you use these pride skills and emotion labeling? If you're able to have special time, even if you're in a support role, having 5 to 10 minutes, 5 minutes is sufficient for kids up to the age of 7. Once kids get older than 7, we recommend 10, just because the play activities that they enjoy tend to take a little bit more time. But you put out 2 to 3 toys or activities that the child tends to really enjoy. You have this time away from distractions, no TV on, cell phone on mute, not paying attention to it. And it's really a time when a child and adult can really connect with one another without the distractions of everything else going on throughout the day. And it's child-led. And by child-led, I mean, you put these 2 to 3 toys or activities out. You say, all right, it's our special time together. You can play with any of the toys I put out. And at that point, you sit back and you only use those pride skills, trying to avoid things like questions and commands, giving a lot of ideas. You let the child lead. And what we tend to see is when parents or support providers engage in this type of play, we see enhanced problem solving in kids because they're able to have the space to work through things without adults jumping in and saying, this is how you should do it, or what if you do it this way? It just really gives them the space to explore. The additional goal, though, is for these skills to be used throughout the day as well. So you think of special time as kind of that multivitamin. It's given high dosage of all the good stuff in like one little, gummy or, capsule. But then we also get those nutrients throughout the day. So we want those skills to be used, from the time the child gets up to the time that they go to bed at night, to really be reinforcing the positive behaviors that we're seeing, and also to be providing that validation, that attention, kind of conveying to the child, you're important to me. And what we find is that paying attention to the positive and providing this emotional validation can be extremely powerful in improving emotional and behavioral regulation, which is what we are setting out to achieve. I'm going to pass over to Vicki.
Okay. So one big thing we talked about is just now is the connecting through play. So there's some considerations for children that have limited play skills, because the same strategies still work, but we will have to adapt it in some way. So children with limited play skills, we often see repetitive play where they might use the same action over and over and over again. Or they might play with items that aren't typical toys, like household objects. I recently encountered a child who loved playing with zip ties, which is very unusual. And they may also prefer playing alone, who just show less interest in engaging with others. And so if we adapt our expectations and our approach, we can still use those pride skills. So first thing we want to consider is the toy or activity selection. So we want to choose items that are developmentally appropriate, but that also align with the child's interest. So for example, if a child just likes to spin objects, we can still use those objects that they like to spin, but we can also offer other toys that have a spinning element, but maybe there's other ways to use it as well. The next thing is to pay attention to the sensory needs as well. So when children avoid or seek certain sensory experiences, we want to select toys that match their sensory preferences. And by doing that, we will make the play much more engaging for them and also much more comfortable. The next thing we might have to do is redefining what the positive behaviors are. So as I said, if a child engages in repetitive play and it's the same action over and over again, we might want to show them a new action or try to get them to do other things, but they might not be ready for that. And so we can still connect with them through describing what they are doing, and maybe even imitating what they do. Even if it is repetitive or unusual or not necessarily the way that the toy was designed originally. We can also model new actions by showing the child how to use the toy in different ways, but we need to do that without pressuring them. So that can be gentle, consistent modeling, and then really enthusiastically providing that praise when they do imitate or when they do try a new action with that toy. So that way the child's play behavior can broaden. And finally, since we said some children just have less interest in interacting with others, we want to reinforce social behaviors. So those can be as little as praising attempts to engage with others, even if it's very short and very small. Like, for example, the child just briefly watches what you're doing or turns towards you a little bit. So even those little things, we really want to praise and reinforce, because that way we create a supportive environment. We encourage growth in social play, and we encourage that interaction, and really reinforce the relationship with the child. Okay, so we also spoke about that these pride skills are especially designed for children up to 7 years old, but some of these emotional challenges our preteens and teens also experience. So we will need to adapt our approaches also to better suit their developmental stage. So the first thing we do is introducing a different range and a broader range of activities. So that would be, instead of selecting toys and connecting through play with toys, we might engage in other activities like sports or board games or arts and crafts that really match their individual interests. And by engaging in those activities together, parents and caregivers can really maintain that engagement while they're also respecting the child's growing autonomy. There will also be much less emphasis on physical proximity. So while younger kids often really thrive when you're physically close to them while you interact, teens and preteens may prefer a little more space. So we will encourage quality time that allows for connection, but without forcing that physical proximity. So again, we recognize their growing need for independence through that. We will also have to adapt the praise and the reflecting listening strategies. So a lot of that is about the wording and the topics that we discuss with the child. Praise always needs to feel genuine and should really not feel overly exaggerated. So the same goes with reflective listening. It needs to be age appropriate, and it really needs to mirror their more complex emotions and their more complex perspectives, and still allow them to feel heard without feeling patronized or judged in any way. We will also let them share more control in conversations. So with the young kids, a lot of when we use those pride skills, it's us leading the conversation. But teens, with their growing need of autonomy and with developing their own opinions, they really, really want to be part of the dialogue as well. So it's important that we give them a voice in discussions, and we really respect their sense of agency and really foster collaboration over one-sided instructions or one-sided interactions. And then the last part, again, is the emotional validation and empathy. When preteens and teens navigate those more intense emotional experiences, it's really important that we validate these emotions. We all know that those ages can be extremely challenging, but we also need to remember that our kids are learning to navigate much more complicated emotional experiences. So when we express empathy to those experiences, they will feel supported, and then that lays the groundwork for open communication throughout their teenage years as well.
All right. So now I'm going to talk about how we can help children label their emotions. And this is really through the use of validation. Okay. So once again, kind of counteracting that invalidation that we all intentionally do and striving instead for validation. So really what validation is it's communicating to the child that their feelings make sense and are understandable given the situation. Okay. So this isn't the same as agreeing with their behavior, right? We don't have to agree with a behavioral outburst that the child is having, but we can still agree with and validate the feeling behind it. And so we're really showing, right, that we understand where they're coming from. So why do we want to validate? First, and I've already talked about this, that helps children identify their own emotions. So once again, we're kind of building up that emotion vocabulary. We're starting to help children understand kind of the connection between what they're feeling inside and what the word is for that. It's really going to decrease the intensity of the emotion, right? It kind of takes the edge off, and it's kind of incredible how powerful this can be, right? But if we kind of go back to that example of like coming home after a really tough day at work and you're feeling really heated, if you walk in and your partner or someone says to you like, it looks like you're feeling really frustrated today. It's been a tough day. I think a lot of us would kind of identify with that feeling of like your shoulders kind of sink a little bit more and you're maybe feeling less tense and uptight about it because wow, someone else understands where I'm coming from and how I'm feeling right now. And so it's taking the edge off and it's decreasing the intensity now of how I feel because I have someone who's kind of sharing.
Here we go. So how do we validate children's emotions? So the first thing we want to do is active listening and just noticing. So that is really paying attention to what they're saying, echoing back what they're saying to us, asking follow-up questions to make sure you understood them correctly, and just notice them and what's going on with them. We will describe the emotion that the child is expressing. So as Erika said earlier, it can be really helpful when somebody validates that they understand how you're feeling and kind of gives you the words for it too. So we'll describe what it feels like to have this emotion and what that emotion may be and what it may be connected to. And then we really want to respond in a way that shows that you are taking the child's emotions seriously. So just as Erika said before, you don't have to agree with their behavior, but it's very important that we show that understanding of why they're feeling this way in this moment. And we really just take that seriously. And then very important, we want to use and instead of but when we are validating. We probably all have experienced that somebody says, I'm sorry that I did that, but you. And so that kind of does the opposite of validating. And so using and statements kind of helps us reframe what we are thinking and really stay on the understanding side rather than blaming or telling them what they did wrong. So when we build emotional resilience, when we help our students or children to learn to self-regulate, we can use a really nice coping toolbox. And so these are coping strategies that can really help the child regulate in that emotion, in that moment where they really experience those intense emotions. So one of those strategies is squeezing lemons. So essentially, this is based on muscle relaxation. So you'll tell the child to squeeze the lemons really tight and squeeze out all of the juice, and then in the end, let go. So they really get that sensory input and they feel their body, and that can really help with calming themselves down. Hi, Erika. Do you want to take over again? I just started with this slide.
Sure. Thank you for taking over. I'm not at my usual office, and I went somewhere where I thought we'd have really good Wi-Fi and no problems, and I was thrown a curveball. So I'm here. Thank you, Vicky, for taking over.
Of course.
So how far did you get with this slide?
I just went through squeezing lemons.
Perfect. All right. So, yeah, this is just a list of kind of a variety of different self-regulation tools. I'm not going to go into them in great detail. A lot of them will be really familiar to everyone. But what I really want to highlight is leading on those calming activities that your child really enjoys, the child that you're working with really enjoys, not needing to really reinvent the wheel. So, if a child likes listening to music, if a child likes playing with slime or Play-Doh, that could be something that could be introduced as a self-regulation tool. We all know, or most of us would know about deep breathing or blowing bubbles. Coping statements are things, like saying, I can do this, I can manage it, I will be okay. And that's different, right, than us telling a child that they'll be okay. It's more of them kind of internalizing this idea that they can cope and they can work through the difficult situation. And then we also have any sensory activities that the child finds soothing. And this kind of goes back to what Vicky was saying of being mindful of the sensory needs of the children that we work with or that we're raising. So some children are going to be very hypersensitive to certain sensory stimulation. So being mindful of that and not introducing anything related to that, that would be averse in nature. But then thinking about if a child likes deep pressure or if a child likes that movement, kind of that proprioceptive movement of swinging back and forth, those would be activities to lean into to help the child regulate. And body breaks are always really great, just kind of taking a break from the situation to regroup.
Okay, so next we're going to go over strategies to address negative attention-seeking behaviors. So that goes back to the functions of behaviors that Erika introduced in the beginning. And obviously those need a little bit different strategies. So our main approach is going to be selective attention. And so what that means is that by ignoring the challenging behavior, we are going to, or the challenging behavior will reduce in the future. And by paying attention to the positive behavior, we strengthen those positive behaviors that we really want to see. I also want to say that these strategies are great for attention-seeking behaviors that are not harmful, like such as whining or throwing a tantrum, but not for behaviors that may be unsafe. They are going to need a little bit of a different approach. So here we go. The question is, how do we attend? So one form of attending is using eye contact, which helps the child know that we are engaged with them, we are listening, And it really doesn't take much to have that eye contact. By playing, we build connection, we show that we're interested in their world. And again, we really focus on the interaction, and the child knows we're here and we're engaged. Smiling is a wonderful way of attending because it sends a message of positivity and encouragement, and touching, like a little pat on the back or a gentle hand on the shoulder, can really provide some comfort and reassurance that what they're doing is exactly what we want to see. And then lastly, of course, we will use praise to really increase those specific actions and reinforce that behavior we would really like the child to engage in more. Now, we use those strategies to attend both during the behavior, but also immediately after. So we are offering real-time feedback, actively engaging with the child, helping the child understand which behaviors are appropriate and desirable. And we provide also an immediate response that reinforces what they did well. So we keep the connection between their action and our feedback really strong. And then immediately after the behavior, we may give an overview of the situation and what they did well and that we had fun. So for example, during the behavior, if a child is playing with blocks, you may say, oh, you're putting the little block on top of the big one. That's a great idea. I'm going to do that too. Wow, you're so gentle stacking those blocks. And then after the child is done building, maybe even knocking it over, we'll provide praise for the entire action. Like, I love how you were so calm and gentle while you built the tower. I had so much fun playing with you. And that reinforces our actions during the play, like when we smiled, we were laughing together, we were holding that eye contact. We also need to know how to ignore properly. And here I want to say we ignore the child's inappropriate behavior, but we never ignore the child as a whole. We really want to remain calm and consistent. And the first strategy to ignore is to look away. So it's the opposite of the eye contact. Instead of looking at them, you're going to look the other way. So that you avoid unintentionally reinforcing that behavior that they're engaging in by giving that eye contact. So you'll keep your face neutral, you'll just focus on something else. And as soon as the child is doing something that's appropriate, you'll look back to them and engage and attend again. Second, you can talk to somebody else in the room. So you'll shift your attention to another person or another activity, and you're showing that that behavior is really not worth engaging with. You can also continue with your current activity, just not look at the child, but just continue what you are doing. Or you may want to move on to a different activity. So again, you're sending the message that the behavior won't interrupt what's happening at the moment. And if it's needed, you can also walk away from the situation. So physically removing yourself can really reinforce more clearly that the inappropriate behavior is not going to gain that attention. And finally, while we ignore the behavior, it can be helpful to choose an alternative option and really make it appealing and exciting. Because when you present a fun, positive alternative, you can redirect the child and really motivate them to make better choices. So again, during the behavior, we want to ignore the behavior, but immediately after the behavior, as soon as they demonstrate anything that's positive, we immediately re-engage. And so we assure that they understand what actions will earn that behavior, that attention. Okay, so as we said before, the selective attention really works with negative attention-seeking behaviors that might be annoying, but they're not unsafe. So we need other strategies to address potentially harmful behaviors. So those behaviors would be aggression toward others, self-injurious behaviors, verbal aggression towards themselves or towards others, property destruction, but also eloping, so running away. With these behaviors, we have to remember that our top priority is to keep the child safe. So we can't really just ignore those behaviors because the child might hurt themselves or they might hurt somebody else. And so when we deal with severe behavior management, there are some priorities we want to keep in our mind. And then there's also some approaches that we can use to make sure that the child is safe. So first, our priorities are number one, safety. Safety is paramount. Our first responsibility is to ensure that all children and those around them are safe. So that also involves being proactive and identifying and reducing potential risks. The next point is dignity. Every child deserves respect regardless of their behavior. So even when they experience those emotions and engage in severe behaviors, we really need to maintain their dignity so that we can continue to build that trust and rapport. Next, prevention is key, and that goes back to being proactive. So by anticipating their triggers and creating strategies to reduce the likelihood of those behaviors, we can create a more positive and a more supportive environment. And then we always want to keep in mind that we want to foster a positive relationship. So we really focus on providing a foundation for effective intervention and effective support. Now, how can we do all of that? So the first step would be to enrich the environment. So having a stimulating, engaging environment can help prevent frustration and boredom, which are often the causes of those challenging behaviors. So that means to just ensure that there's always things that the child really enjoys, that they're around, so that they have different things that they enjoy engaging with. We also want to let the child lead. So we encourage their autonomy, and we can reduce resistance and frustration that way. So they get to feel like they're in control. Of course, we want to stay engaged and present. So we want to use our pride skills that we discussed earlier to really foster that positive atmosphere and build a positive connection. The next thing is to genuinely honor all forms of communication. So we're not only focusing on vocal speech, but that also includes using AAC devices like talkers, using gestures or sign language, or even just showing physical cues like pointing or facial expressions, looking at things. So recognizing all of these forms of communication really validates the child's effort to express themselves. We also want to allow and honor repetitive behaviors. I think a lot of the time we want to reduce those repetitive behaviors because they may be inappropriate in the situation. But we also have to remember that those can provide comfort and stability because they are a form of sensory input. So instead of seeing them as problematic, we can really view them as self-regulation strategies, and so integrate them into activities or into the situation to ensure the child remains well regulated. We also want to limit demands. Again, that often goes against what we want, right? We want the child to be independent. We want the child to be on time. But a lot of demands we put on children throughout the day are really not that essential. So by reducing those demands and really only giving the demands that are truly essential, we reduce the pressure on the child, we decrease anxiety, and we promote cooperation. And when a demand is essential, it is really, really helpful to either hide the demand. For example, saying, oh, I'm going to go put on my shoes because I want to go to the playground. So you're hiding the demand. And also to validate that following that demand can be really difficult at that moment. So you really want to validate the child's feelings so they already feel heard and respected and understood. And hopefully you can prevent those challenging behaviors through that. And then the last point is reinforcement of lower rates of behaviors. So a lot of the time when children engage in any of those severe behaviors, we want to see them completely gone. And so it can be a little counterintuitive to really recognize that the child engages in a less intense form of their challenging behavior, or that they're engaging in their challenging behavior less frequently. And so when we reinforce those lower rates of their behavior, for example, if a child bangs their head against the wall when they're frustrated, but today, instead of banging their head against the wall, they hit their head with their hand, we can tell them, I love that you're trying to keep your head safe. Or if they bang the wall lighter than usually, I love that you're trying to be gentle with your head. So that way we can shape those behaviors towards more appropriate behaviors and towards safety. So we're recognizing those steps in between for them to be successful. All right, that would be the end of our presentation. We have some time for questions, I think. Actually, I think we're running a little late, Erika, right?
We are. If there are any questions, we had promised to save time to answer, so happy to field them. We're not seeing any questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, I think you can either unmute yourself or raise your hand, just so we're sure to answer anything that might be coming up for people. All right. Well, take this as a good sign then that everything we talked about was very clear and articulate and makes sense. I think we'll wrap up then. Thank you so much for persisting through with me, Vicky, for covering for me with my tech outage, which I'm in a very large building with very good Wi-Fi, so I have no idea what just happened. But it's been a pleasure presenting to all of you, and particularly alongside Vicky. You have any questions come up, I think people have the information for Apex Social and also for Manhattan Psychology Group. We hope that this was very helpful and that you have the chance to implement the strategies that we talked about today.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you, Antonia. I'm glad that you found it helpful. So thank you for the feedback.
All right, everyone. It's been a pleasure. All right. Take care.
Bye.